Found among Miles Carter's belongings at Glacier Rim Campsite, Flathead National Forest. Journal entry dated October 12, 2025. Handwriting analysis confirms authenticity. Park Service Evidence Log #FR 2025-1847. Day 1, October 12, 2025. 5:47 a.m. The silence here is perfect. Not the absence of sound. That's different, sterile, like the anechoic chambers we used at the radio observatory. This is the kind of silence that breathes, full of wind threading through lodgepole pines and the distant murmur of Glacier Creek cutting through granite. It's the silence I came here to capture through my lens, the pristine Montana wilderness that exists between the frequencies of human interference. I've set up camp at the Glacier Rim site, elevation 6,200 feet, coordinates 48 degrees 47 minutes north, 113 degrees 52 minutes west. The magazine assignment called for untouched American landscapes, but I know the real reason I'm here. 3 weeks since Aurora stopped responding to my calls. 3 weeks since our last conversation about the signals we detected before the project was shuttered. 3 weeks of wondering if our work meant something more than bureaucratic funding cuts. The campsite sits on a natural terrace carved into the mountainside, offering an unobstructed view of the Cabinet Mountain ridges stretching north toward the Canadian border. Peaks rise like granite teeth against the pre-dawn sky, their edges still sharp with September snow. My photographer's eye catalogs the scene. Foreground depth created by weathered timber, middle ground defined by the valley's shadow play, background anchored by those serrated ridges that will catch the first light in approximately 43 minutes. I've positioned my equipment with methodical precision. The Nikon D850 mounted on carbon fiber legs, telephoto lens focused on the primary ridge line. Backup body loaded with film. Aurora always insisted on film for documenting anomalies, claimed digital sensors filtered out subtleties the human eye could catch. The radio sits beside my camp stove, tuned to the emergency frequency, crackling with occasional weather updates from stations 50 miles south. Standard protocol for wilderness photography. Inform someone of your location, monitor conditions, document everything. But this isn't standard anything. The radio has been quiet since I arrived yesterday afternoon. No response from Aurora's satellite phone. No acknowledgement from the research station where we spent 2 years listening to the cosmos, parsing signals from nothing, finding patterns in static that our supervisors dismissed as equipment artifacts. I've tried not to think about the last signal we detected, the mathematical sequence that repeated for 6 hours before vanishing, originating from coordinates that placed it somewhere above these exact ridges. 6:29 a.m. First light creeps across the valley like spilled mercury, transforming the landscape from monochrome shadows to a palette of amber and rust. I begin shooting, the camera's shutter a rhythmic counterpoint to my breathing. This is meditation through mechanism, finding stillness in the precise moment when light becomes photography. The ridges emerge from darkness with geological patience. Layer by layer, the rising sun reveals their texture. Limestone strata striped with iron oxide, fossil-embedded limestone that remembers ancient seas, surfaces carved by 10,000 years of weather into abstract sculptures. Through my telephoto lens, I can resolve individual rock formations, the way morning light creates temporary waterfalls of shadow and illumination. That's when I notice the irregularities. At first, I assume it's lens flare, unavoidable when shooting directly toward sunrise. But these aren't the typical hexagonal artifacts of light refracting through glass elements. These are geometric, sharp-edged shapes that seem to flicker between triangular and trapezoidal, appearing in clusters along the ridgeline where no rock formations could create such precise angles. I adjust my position, change focal lengths, check for equipment malfunction. The shapes persist. They're subtle, barely visible unless you're looking for them, but definitely present. Not reflections from snow or ice. The morning's too warm for frost, and these patterns appear against the darkest rock faces where no reflective surfaces exist. Through the viewfinder, I count 7 distinct formations spread across approximately 2 miles of ridge. Each one flickers with the same rhythm, like a slow heartbeat of light. When I lower the camera to observe with naked eyes, they're almost invisible, existing at the edge of perception. But through the telephoto lens, magnified and focused, they're unmistakable. I document everything methodically, professional habits overriding the growing unease in my chest. Shoot wide for context, then tight for detail. Bracket exposures to capture the full dynamic range. Check histogram to ensure I'm not clipping highlights. The photographer's routine provides comfort, familiar steps in an increasingly unfamiliar situation. The radio crackles to life. This is NOAA Weather Station Kalispell with your 6:30 a.m. Mountain Time forecast. Clear skies with light variable winds. High pressure system moving in from the Pacific Northwest. Temperature range 42 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. No weather advisories in effect for Flathead, Lincoln, or Glacier counties. Standard broadcast. Nothing unusual. But as the transmission ends, static fills the frequency, not the random white noise of atmospheric interference, but structured pulses that follow a pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. Pause. Repeat. I've heard that pattern before. 6:52 a.m. The geometric shapes along the ridgeline pulse in sync with the radio static. I'm sure of it now, having observed for 20 minutes with growing certainty. Each time the structured pulses emerge from the radio's speaker, those flickering formations intensify, their edges becoming sharper, more defined. The correlation is too precise to be coincidental. I should pack up, leave, drive back to civilization, and file this under equipment malfunction or optical illusion. But Aurora's voice echoes in my memory. Miles, what if we weren't just listening? What if something was listening back? The last photograph I take shows all 7 formations simultaneously active, creating a complex pattern of light across the ridgeline. In the camera's LCD display, they look almost intentional, like signals being transmitted between peaks. Like a conversation in a language of geometry and light. Why do those light patterns look almost intentional? Journal entry ends abruptly. Next entry dated October 13th, handwriting noticeably less steady. Park Service evidence log. Journal pages found loose in Miles Carter's backpack, some entries water damaged. Handwriting shows slight tremor compared to previous entries. Park Service evidence log #FR 2025-1848. Day 2, October 13th, 2025. 7:23 a.m. Slept poorly. The radio continued its structured pulses until nearly midnight. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short, before settling into normal static. I kept the camera ready beside my sleeping bag, hoping to catch the geometric shapes during their nocturnal activity. But the formations only appear with direct sunlight hitting the ridges. Or maybe they're always there, and I simply can't see them in darkness. This morning brought the same phenomenon. 7 flickering patterns synchronized with radio interference. I've shot nearly 200 photographs, adjusting for every conceivable variable. The shapes persist across all focal lengths, exposure settings, and filter combinations. Film stock shows identical results to digital capture. Whatever I'm documenting is definitely there, not some artifact of electronic sensors or optical aberration. The unease from yesterday has crystallized into something sharper. Not fear exactly, but the recognition that I'm witnessing something beyond my current understanding. Aurora would have loved this mystery. Her absence feels more pronounced here, surrounded by evidence that our research might have been vindicated. 10:45 a.m. Company arrived this morning in the form of Ranger Eliza Stone, driving a battered Ford pickup that announced her approach from 2 miles away. She's exactly what Central Casting would order for a Montana park ranger. Weathered face that's seen 15 winters, practical clothing that prioritizes function over form, eyes that catalog details with professional intensity. But there's something else in those eyes, a wariness that suggests she's seen more than routine wildlife management and lost tourist rescues. Mr. Carter? She approached my campsite with casual authority, clipboard in hand. I'm Eliza Stone, district ranger for this section. Heard we had a photographer up here doing some extended documentation. I explained the magazine assignment, showed her my permits, offered coffee from my camp stove. Standard wilderness courtesy. But her attention kept drifting to my camera equipment, specifically the telephoto lens still pointed toward the ridgeline. Getting some good shots of the ridges? Her tone carried careful neutrality. Interesting light patterns, I replied, equally careful. Some unusual optical effects with the sunrise angles. That's when her expression shifted. Not dramatically. Eliza Stone doesn't seem given to dramatic reactions, but I caught the micro-expression of someone who recognizes a topic they'd rather avoid. Mind showing me what you've captured? I scrolled through the digital images on my camera's LCD display. Standard landscape shots of granite formations, morning mist, alpine vegetation. Then the images containing the geometric shapes. Eliza studied each photograph with increasing focus, her weathered hands steady on the camera body. "Lens flares," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "You get all kinds of optical tricks shooting into direct sunlight." That's what I thought initially. I switched to the telephoto shots, showing multiple formations, but they're consistent across different angles and exposures, and they seem to pulse in patterns. Eliza's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She handed back the camera with deliberate casualness, but I noticed her eyes scanning the ridgeline where the shapes had appeared. "Mr. Carter, how long you planning to stay up here?" "Originally scheduled for 5 days. Depends on weather and what I'm able to document. Weather might be turning." She pulled out a handheld radio, checked its settings. "We've been getting reports of atmospheric disturbances in this region. Communication dead zones, equipment malfunctions. Might be safer to wrap up your work and head back to civilization." The radio in her hand crackled with static, not the structured pulses I'd been hearing, but chaotic white noise that made her frown and adjust the frequency. "Dead zones?" I pressed. "Electronics go haywire sometimes in these mountains. Magnetic anomalies in the rock formations, solar activity, that sort of thing." Her explanation sounded rehearsed, the kind of official response given to discourage further questions. "We've had hikers get disoriented when their GPS units malfunction. Some wildlife behaving strangely too." "What kind of strange behavior?" Eliza's radio squawked with an incoming transmission. "Base to Ranger Stone. Please respond with your current position." She keyed the microphone. "Stone here. Currently at Glacier Rim campsite conducting routine patrol." "Copy that. Be advised we've received reports of unusual wildlife movement in your sector. Large ungulates moving in coordinated groups, abandoning traditional grazing areas. Recommend heightened awareness." "Understood, base. We'll monitor and report." The transmission ended, leaving us in silence broken only by wind through the pines. Eliza clipped the radio back to her belt, but I caught her glancing again toward the ridgeline. "Coordinated groups?" I asked. "Elk mostly. Sometimes deer. They're herd animals, but this is different. Like they're all moving away from something." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "You haven't noticed anything unusual about the local wildlife? Birds, small mammals?" Now that she mentioned it, I realized the forest had been remarkably quiet. No bird song, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. The silence I'd initially found peaceful suddenly felt ominous. "It's been very quiet," I admitted. Eliza nodded grimly. "Animals know things before we do. They sense changes we can't detect yet." She shouldered her pack, preparing to leave. "Mr. Carter, I've been working these mountains for 15 years. Seen all kinds of natural phenomena, most of it explainable once you understand the science. But some things," she gestured vaguely toward the peaks, "some things in these mountains are better left alone." 12:30 p.m. After Eliza left, I reviewed our conversation while eating lunch. Her dismissal of the geometric shapes as lens flares felt perfunctory, contradicted by her obvious familiarity with the phenomena. The wildlife reports suggested environmental stress extending beyond simple weather patterns, and her final warning carried the weight of personal experience, not bureaucratic caution. I attempted to contact Aurora again using the satellite phone. No response from her number, but the connection attempts triggered unusual feedback. Electronic squealing that resolved into what sounded almost like mathematical notation translated into audio frequencies. The sound reminded me of dial-up modem protocols, data packets being transmitted in acoustic form. The radio has been silent since Eliza's departure, no more structured pulses. But occasionally, when I adjust the frequency, I catch fragments of distant broadcasts that don't match any stations in the area. Voices speaking in measured cadences, reporting coordinates and timestamps, discussing atmospheric disturbances and visual contact protocols. Official language, government language. This afternoon's photography session revealed an 8th geometric formation, this one larger than the others and positioned at the center of the ridge formation. Through the telephoto lens, it appears to pulse with greater intensity, its edges sharper, more defined. Sometimes it seems to flicker between different shapes, triangular, then hexagonal, then something more complex that hurts to look at directly. I should heed Eliza's warning. Pack up, drive back to Kalispell, file my story about Montana's natural beauty. But Aurora's voice whispers in my memory, reminding me that the greatest discoveries come from investigating what others dismiss or fear. Is someone watching me watch them? Entry ends mid-page. Ink smudged as if writer's hand trembled. Park Service evidence log. Journal pages show evidence of coffee stains and hasty note-taking in margins. Handwriting becomes more urgent throughout entry. Several mathematical equations sketched between lines. Park Service Evidence Log #FR 2025-1849. Day 3, October 14th, 2025. 4:17 a.m. Couldn't sleep. Spent most of the night analyzing audio recordings from the radio interference, feeding the patterns through spectrum analysis software on my laptop. What I've discovered defies reasonable explanation, but the mathematics don't lie. The structured pulses, 3 short, 2 long, 3 short, aren't random electromagnetic phenomena. They follow the Fibonacci sequence when analyzed over extended periods. Each burst contains harmonic frequencies that correspond to prime number intervals. This isn't atmospheric disturbance. It's communication using universal mathematical constants that any intelligent species would recognize. Aurora, and I theorized about exactly this type of signal during our SETI research. Mathematics as the universal language, prime numbers as proof of intelligence, geometric progressions as complex information encoding. What we're hearing through the radio static is a transmission protocol more sophisticated than anything terrestrial. The realization should terrify me. Instead, I feel vindicated. 2 years of dismissed research, bureaucratic funding cuts, and academic ridicule suddenly make sense. We were right. Something was listening, and now something is responding. 6:45 a.m. Dawn photography session revealed disturbing developments. The geometric formations have multiplied, now 13 distinct shapes across the ridgeline, arranged in what can only be described as a mathematical pattern. When plotted on coordinate paper, their positions correspond to vertices of a complex geometric figure that extends beyond the visible ridge formation. More troubling, they're responding to my presence. When I point the telephoto lens at specific formations, they pulse more rapidly. When I lower the camera, they dim to barely perceptible flickers. The correlation is undeniable. They know they're being observed and are reacting accordingly. I've been photographing what might be the first documented evidence of non-human intelligence actively communicating through visual displays. The implications stagger me. Why here? Why now? And why have I received no response from Aurora, who would understand the significance better than anyone? 9:23 a.m. Attempted satellite phone connection to Aurora's research station. Instead of her voicemail, I received something that froze my blood, structured pulses matching the radio interference, transmitted through cellular frequencies. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short, followed by new patterns I hadn't heard before, longer sequences that seemed to incorporate the mathematical ratios I'd calculated from the radio transmissions. Someone or something has access to our communication infrastructure. The pulses came through Aurora's number, but they weren't generated by any human-built equipment. The audio contained harmonic frequencies outside the range of standard telecommunication systems. I terminated the call immediately, but damage may already be done. If these entities can infiltrate cellular networks, they now have my number, my location, potentially my entire digital footprint. The photographer who came here to document landscapes may have inadvertently documented humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. 11:56 a.m. Unexpected visitor arrived just after noon. Military vehicle, unmarked Humvee with government plates, driven by a man who introduced himself only as Hunter Dale. Late 30s, precise movements that suggest special forces training, equipment that definitely doesn't match his cover story about weather monitoring. Mr. Carter? I'm with the National Weather Service, conducting atmospheric studies in this region. His handshake was firm, his eyes constantly scanning my campsite, cataloging my equipment with professional interest. Understanding you've been experiencing some unusual weather phenomena. The lie was so transparent, it bordered on insulting. No Weather Service personnel carries military-grade communication equipment or wears tactical boots designed for combat operations. But I played along, curious about official interest in my discoveries. Some electromagnetic interference with my radio equipment, I replied carefully. Probably solar activity affecting atmospheric conditions. Hunter's attention fixed on my telephoto lens, still pointed toward the ridgeline. Mind if I take a look at what you've been documenting? Weather Service is always interested in photographic evidence of atmospheric anomalies. I showed him the landscape shots first, safe images of granite formations and alpine scenery. His expression remained neutral until I reached the photographs containing geometric formations. Then his body language shifted subtly. Shoulders tensed, Breathing pattern changed, eyes focused with laser intensity on the LCD display. Interesting lens flares, he said, echoing Eliza's dismissal. But unlike the Ranger, Hunter studied each image with obvious recognition. He knew exactly what he was looking at. You've seen similar phenomena? I pressed. Solar activity can create all kinds of optical effects, particularly at high altitudes where atmospheric filtering is reduced. Another rehearsed response, delivered with military precision. Mr. Carter, how long have you been observing these atmospheric disturbances? 3 days. They seem to occur primarily during sunrise, though I've detected associated radio interference throughout the night. Hunter's radio crackled to life. Base to Mobile 7, requesting status update on atmospheric monitoring assignment. He keyed the microphone. Mobile 7, continuing observational protocols. Subject maintains position and continues documentation activities. The transmission chilled me. Subject. Not photographer, not civilian, not weather observer. Subject. I was being monitored, classified, studied like a specimen in someone's experiment. Mr. Carter, Hunter's tone shifted to barely concealed authority. We've been tracking unusual electromagnetic signatures in this region. For your safety, I'd recommend concluding your photography work and returning to populated areas. Some atmospheric phenomena can affect human perception and judgment. Are you ordering me to leave? I'm advising you to leave. There's a difference, though the outcome should be the same. He shouldered his pack, preparing to depart. These mountains can play tricks on people's minds. Sometimes what we think we're seeing isn't really there. And sometimes what's really there isn't something we should be seeing. 2:15 p.m. After Hunter's departure, I reviewed the encounter while uploading today's photographs to secure cloud storage. His presence confirms government awareness of the phenomena, possibly extending back weeks or months. The military-grade equipment suggests more than casual monitoring. This is active surveillance of an ongoing situation. The geometric formations have grown more complex throughout the day. The central formation now pulses in synchronized patterns with 6 surrounding shapes, creating a visual rhythm that matches the mathematical sequences I've extracted from radio interference. It's as if they're demonstrating the connection between their visual displays and audio transmissions. Emergency radio broadcast interrupted my analysis at 2:47 p.m. This is Emergency Management Montana with a special weather advisory for Flathead, Lincoln, and Glacier counties. Residents and visitors in mountainous regions should be aware of unusual atmospheric conditions causing visual anomalies and electronic interference. Do not rely solely on electronic navigation equipment. Report any significant atmospheric disturbances to local authorities immediately. Visual anomalies. Official acknowledgement that something is happening, though couched in meteorological language that deflects rather than explains. The timing feels coordinated with Hunter's visit. Establish official awareness while maintaining plausible deniability. But the broadcast revealed something more disturbing. In the background static, barely audible beneath the official announcement, I caught fragments of the same structured pulses that have been emanating from my radio. The emergency management system itself is contaminated with the alien signals. Whatever intelligence is behind these phenomena has infiltrated our communication infrastructure at multiple levels. Radio, cellular, even emergency broadcast systems carry traces of their mathematical transmissions. We're not just being observed, we're being systematically integrated into their communication network. The sun is setting now, and I can see the geometric formations beginning their evening display. 13 patterns stretching across 2 miles of ridgeline, pulsing in perfect mathematical harmony. They're beautiful and terrible, these impossible shapes that shouldn't exist in our reality but undeniably do. Tomorrow I'll attempt direct communication, using the mathematical sequences I've decoded to respond to their signals. Aurora always said first contact would require us to prove our intelligence through mathematical demonstration. If she were here, she'd be proud of what I've discovered. If she were here, why won't she answer my calls? And why do I have the growing certainty that those signals I detected 2 years ago, the ones that led me to these exact coordinates, were never random cosmic noise, but a carefully planned invitation? Entry continues on next page with increasingly erratic mathematical calculations filling margins. Park Service Evidence Log. Journal pages show evidence of prolonged use, coffee rings, and obsessive note-taking. Mathematical equations fill every margin. Several pages torn out. Park Service Evidence Log #FR 2025-1850. Day 4, October 15th, 2025. 5:33 a.m. They knew I was coming. Before dawn, while setting up equipment for today's photography session, I discovered my campsite had been arranged. Not disturbed, arranged. My backup camera, which I'd left secured in the tent's vestibule, sat perfectly centered on a flat rock, lens cap removed, pointing directly at the primary ridge formation. My camp stove had been repositioned to create a precise 60-degree angle with the tent and camera tripod. Even my water bottles were aligned in a geometric pattern that matched the mathematical sequences I'd been documenting. No footprints, no tire tracks, no evidence of human presence. But everything had been moved with surgical precision while I slept 15 feet away. I should be terrified. Instead, I feel a growing sense of purpose. They're acknowledging my presence, responding to my attempts at communication. This is contact, messy, incomplete, but undeniably real. 6:47 a.m. The formations have evolved overnight. Now 17 distinct shapes stretch across the ridgeline, but their behavior has fundamentally changed. Instead of simple pulsing patterns, they're creating complex tessellations, geometric shapes that interlock and transform, forming larger patterns that exist for moments before dissolving into new configurations. Through the telephoto lens, I can observe details that should be impossible at this distance. The shapes aren't light distortions or optical illusions. They're three-dimensional constructs that seem to exist slightly out of phase with normal space, flickering between visible and invisible as they shift through dimensions our eyes weren't designed to perceive. When I photograph them, the camera captures impossible geometries. Triangles with four sides, circles that somehow contain right angles, shapes that hurt to look at directly but make perfect sense when viewed peripherally. The mathematics suggest I'm documenting objects that exist in more than three spatial dimensions, partially manifesting in our reality through pure force of will or technology beyond our comprehension. 9:15 a.m. Attempted direct communication using my laptop speaker system. I converted the mathematical sequences I'd decoded from radio interference into audio pulses, prime number intervals, Fibonacci progressions, and harmonic frequencies that match their transmission patterns. 3 hours of systematic broadcasting toward the ridge formations. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every geometric shape began pulsing in perfect synchronization with my transmissions. As I increased complexity, adding pi calculations, golden ratio sequences, and binary representations of fundamental physical constants, their displays became more elaborate. They were learning from my signals, incorporating new mathematical concepts into their visual vocabulary in real time. But the most disturbing discovery came when I attempted to end the communication session. The formations continued pulsing in patterns I hadn't transmitted, new mathematical sequences more complex than anything I'd sent. They were teaching me, demonstrating mathematical relationships I'd never encountered, showing me glimpses of numerical concepts that seemed to incorporate additional dimensions of reality. I'm no longer initiating contact. I'm being educated. 11:42 a.m. Hunter returned with reinforcements. 3 additional personnel in unmarked vehicles, carrying equipment I recognize from classified military research programs. Electromagnetic field detectors, atmospheric sampling devices, and what appears to be experimental communication arrays that definitely aren't standard weather monitoring gear. "Mr. Carter," Hunter approached with grim determination, "you need to cease all communication attempts immediately. You're interfering with sensitive atmospheric research." "What kind of atmospheric research requires quantum field detectors?" I challenged, recognizing the specialized equipment from my years in government-funded research. Hunter's expression hardened. "The kind that keeps people safe from phenomena they don't understand." He gestured toward my laptop and audio equipment. "How long have you been transmitting mathematical sequences?" "You've been monitoring my communications?" "We monitor everything in this region. Radio transmissions, cellular activity, electromagnetic signatures. What you've been doing isn't just dangerous, it's potentially catastrophic." He paused, studying the ridge formations through binoculars. "These aren't weather phenomena, Mr. Carter. There's something else entirely, and your amateur attempts at contact are escalating the situation beyond our ability to contain." The admission hung between us like a physical presence. Official acknowledgement that the formations represented something beyond atmospheric disturbance, beyond natural phenomenon, beyond terrestrial explanation. "Contain," I pressed. "How long have you been aware of them?" "Longer than you might think. But they were dormant until recently. Inactive." observable but non-responsive. His radio crackled with urgent transmissions from his team. Your mathematical broadcasts have changed that. They're awake now, and they're learning. Emergency broadcast interrupted our conversation. This is Emergency Management Montana with an urgent advisory for all residents and visitors in the Cabinet Mountain region. Due to escalating atmospheric disturbances, visual anomalies, and equipment malfunctions, evacuation is strongly recommended for all non-essential personnel. Avoid direct visual contact with unusual light formations. Do not attempt to photograph or record anomalous phenomena. Emergency shelters are being established in Libby and Kalispell. The official language had shifted from advisory to urgent. Visual anomalies were now acknowledged. Direct visual contact was being discouraged. Most telling, they were recommending against photography and recording, suggesting awareness that observation itself might be dangerous. 24 hours, Hunter said firmly. Pack your equipment and evacuate to established shelters. This region is being designated a restricted area effective immediately. And if I refuse, then you'll be removed for your own safety and the safety of others. He shouldered his equipment pack, preparing to rejoin his team. Mr. Carter, whatever you think you're accomplishing here, you're wrong. These entities don't want communication. They want something else entirely, and your signals are helping them achieve it. 2:30 p.m. After Hunter's departure, I analyzed the morning's photographic evidence with growing unease. The camera captured details invisible to naked observation, geometric patterns that extend beyond the ridge formations, mathematical sequences spelled out in arrangements of rock and shadow, coordinates encoded in the positioning of individual trees. The environment itself is being restructured. Not dramatically, not obviously, but with precision that suggests intelligence operating on a scale I hadn't previously imagined. What I interpreted as communication attempts may have been instructions, commands being transmitted through the landscape itself. The radio interference has intensified throughout the day. Instead of structured pulses, I'm receiving what sounds like multiple conversations in mathematical languages, overlapping transmissions that create harmonics suggesting vast distances and multiple sources. Not one intelligence, but many, all focused on this specific region. Aurora's satellite phone number now connects to something that isn't human telecommunications infrastructure. The pulses have evolved into complex symphonies of numerical relationships, transmitted with clarity that suggests the entities have completely co-opted that communication channel. Whatever happened to Aurora, her equipment is now part of their network. 5:47 p.m. The formations have begun moving, not flickering between positions, actually moving across the landscape like living geometry. Through the telephoto lens, I can observe them flowing along the ridgeline, maintaining their mathematical relationships while exploring new positions. Some have descended from the peaks, approaching the tree line where forest meets stone. They're coming closer. The camera's autofocus system struggles to track their movement, as if their dimensional instability confuses the optical sensors. But when I manage to capture them in sharp focus, the resulting images show impossible detail. Internal structures that resemble circuitry, organic patterns that pulse with their own light, geometric forms that seem to contain infinite recursive depth. As evening approaches, I can see them without the telephoto lens. 17 shapes moving through the forest, each one the size of a small building, flowing through three-dimensional space with the fluid grace of entities unbound by conventional physics. Their light casts shadows that move independently, creating secondary patterns on the ground that spell out coordinates, timestamps, and mathematical equations I lack the expertise to interpret. I should evacuate. Hunter's warnings echo in my memory, joined by Eliza's cryptic advice about leaving some things alone. But Aurora's voice whispers louder, reminding me that the greatest discoveries require courage to venture beyond safe boundaries. Tonight, they'll reach my campsite. Tomorrow, I'll learn what they've been trying to teach me through mathematics and light. The invitation I received 2 years ago through cosmic radio signals is about to be fulfilled. What if our SETI research wasn't detecting random signals, but responding to a carefully planned recruitment process? What if every mathematician, every astronomer, every curious mind that reaches toward the stars is eventually invited to join something larger than human understanding? The shapes in the ridges weren't just watching me. They were testing me, preparing me, determining whether I possess the intellectual capacity to comprehend what they're offering. Tomorrow, I'll discover if I pass their examination. Entry ends abruptly. Next page missing from journal. Park Service evidence log. Journal pages show water damage and burn marks. Several entries written in different colored inks, suggesting prolonged composition over multiple sessions. Mathematical diagrams cover margins and empty spaces. Park Service Evidence Log #FR 2025-1851. Day 5, October 16, 2025. 3:17 a.m. They didn't come to my campsite. They surrounded it. I woke to 17 geometric formations arranged in a perfect circle around my tent, each one pulsing with synchronized light that cast impossible shadows. Shadows that bent upward. Shadows that existed without objects to create them. Shadows that moved independently of their supposed sources. The mathematics of their positioning was flawless, each shape equidistant from my location, creating angles that formed a complex mandala when viewed from above. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't their proximity. It was their patience. They weren't moving, weren't communicating, weren't demonstrating the fluid grace I'd observed yesterday. They were simply waiting. 17 interdimensional entities maintaining vigil around a single human campsite, like guardians or sentinels assigned to monitor something precious or dangerous. Through my tent fabric, their combined luminescence created an Aurora effect, waves of mathematical light that painted geometric patterns across the nylon walls. I could read equations in those projections, formulas that described relationships between space and time that human physics has barely begun to theorize. They were teaching me through passive demonstration, allowing me to absorb concepts that would take years of graduate study to understand through conventional education. I am being prepared for something. 4:45 a.m. Aurora's transmission arrived as I was documenting the formation's positioning. Not through satellite phone, not through radio equipment, but through every electronic device simultaneously. My laptop screen filled with cascading mathematical sequences. My camera's LCD display showed geometric patterns that matched the entity's light projections. Even my digital watch began pulsing in rhythm with their synchronized luminescence. Her voice, when it finally emerged from the static symphony, was layered with harmonics that suggested she was speaking from multiple locations simultaneously. Miles, can you receiving this transmission? The connection is unstable across dimensional barriers. Aurora, where are you? Your phone's been dead for days. Not dead, transformed. I'm everywhere they are, Miles. Every observation point, every contact site across the globe. They don't just visit individual locations, they create networks. Interconnected phenomena that span continents. Her words fragmented into mathematical pulses before reforming. Listen carefully. What you're experiencing isn't first contact. It's recruitment. They've been monitoring our SETI research for decades, identifying individuals with the intellectual capacity to comprehend their existence. Our signals 2 years ago weren't random discoveries. They were responding to a systematic invitation process. The implications crystallized with terrifying clarity. Every astronomer who had detected similar signals, every researcher who had documented unexplained phenomena, every curious mind that had reached toward the stars, we hadn't been making independent discoveries. We had been selected, tested, gradually prepared for this moment. Aurora, how many others? How many people are experiencing this? 17 primary sites active simultaneously, each one anchored by a SETI researcher who received their invitation. Mathematical minds capable of serving as translators between their dimensional mathematics and human understanding. 17 sites, 17 researchers, 17 geometric formations surrounding my campsite. The correlation was impossible to ignore. 6:20 a.m. Aurora's transmission continued intermittently throughout the morning, her voice growing stronger as the formation's luminescence intensified. She described a global network of contact sites, each one centered around a former SETI researcher who had detected the initial invitation signals. Scientists in Chile, astronomers in Australia, radio telescope operators in Wales, all experiencing identical phenomena, all serving as anchor points for an interdimensional mapping project. They're not invading, Miles. They're documenting. Every species they encounter, every world they visit, every civilization they contact. It's all part of an enormous catalog that spans multiple realities. We're being recorded, studied, preserved in their vast database of universal phenomena. Preserved for what purpose? Unknown. But the process requires voluntary participation from representatives of each species. They can't document us without our conscious cooperation, without minds capable of understanding their methods and translating between human perception and their multidimensional existence. The formations around my campsite began responding to our conversation, their geometric patterns shifting to mirror the mathematical concepts Aurora described. They were monitoring our communication, learning from our discussion, incorporating new information into their behavioral algorithms. "Aurora, can you return? Can you break the connection and come back?" Static filled the transmission for several minutes before her voice returned, distant and fragmented. "I don't think I want to, Miles. What they're showing me, the scope of reality beyond our single dimension, it's beautiful. Terrifying, but beautiful. Infinite worlds, infinite variations of existence, all connected through mathematical relationships that make our understanding of physics seem primitive." Her voice was changing, developing harmonic overtones that suggested she was speaking from inside their geometric framework rather than from conventional three-dimensional space. "They're offering us a choice, Miles. Remain human and limited, or join their documentation project and experience existence from a perspective that encompasses multiple realities simultaneously. But once you accept, once you allow them to expand your perceptual framework, there's no returning to the confined awareness of single-dimensional existence." 8:15 a.m. Eliza arrived as Aurora's transmission faded into mathematical static. But her approach differed dramatically from previous visits. She moved with systematic precision, following sight lines that avoided direct visual contact with the formations, carrying equipment that included electromagnetic shields and specialized optical filters. "How long have they been positioned around your campsite?" she asked without preamble, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Since before dawn. They're not threatening, they're waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For me to make a choice." Eliza's expression hardened as she processed my words. "Mr. Carter, I need you to understand something that we've been trying to keep classified. This isn't Montana's first contact event. We've been dealing with similar phenomena for 18 months, scattered incidents across remote wilderness areas. But this is the first time they've established such a concentrated presence around a single individual." She gestured toward the formations with careful movements that suggested extensive training in safe observation protocols. Every previous incident ended the same way. The targeted individual either evacuated successfully or, she paused, struggling with official language, or their remains were never recovered. What we found instead were geometric patterns burned into the landscape, mathematical equations scorched into rock and earth that our best cryptographers still can't fully decode. "You think they're dangerous?" "I think they're beyond our ability to categorize as safe or dangerous. They operate according to rules that don't align with human survival interests." Her radio crackled with urgent transmissions from Park Service headquarters. "But you're different, Mr. Carter. You're the first person to establish sustained communication, the first to demonstrate understanding of their mathematical language. That makes you either incredibly valuable or incredibly dangerous." Emergency alert, 9:33 a.m. The broadcast interrupted our conversation with unprecedented urgency. "Emergency Management Montana advises all residents that evacuation protocols are no longer effective for anomalous phenomena in the Cabinet Mountain region. Individuals within the affected area should shelter in place and avoid any attempts to leave designated safe zones. Visual contact with geometric formations has proven harmful to human physiology. Do not photograph, record, or attempt communication with unknown entities. Military support is en route for civilian extraction operations." The language had shifted from advisory to crisis management. Visual contact was now acknowledged as harmful. Military extraction suggested the situation had escalated beyond local emergency response capabilities. But most significantly, they were admitting the existence of unknown entities. Official acknowledgement that we were dealing with non-human intelligence. 10:47 a.m. Hunter's return brought devastating news. His team had lost contact with 3 other research sites overnight. SETI stations in New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado had gone silent, their last transmissions consisting of mathematical sequences identical to those I'd been documenting. "The network is expanding," he said grimly, studying the formations through military-grade optical equipment. 17 primary sites have become 17 active nodes in some kind of interdimensional communication array. Every astronomer, every researcher who received the initial invitation signals, they're all experiencing identical phenomena simultaneously. "What about Aurora? Have other researchers reported similar contact?" "Dr. Finch's situation is unique. Satellite tracking shows her equipment signature at multiple locations simultaneously, as if she's existing in several places at once. Either their technology allows for consciousness projection, or, he paused, reluctant to voice the implications, or human awareness can be expanded beyond the limitations of single-location existence. The formations pulsed brighter as Hunter spoke, responding to our discussion with increased mathematical complexity. They were listening, learning, incorporating our military terminology and emergency protocols into their behavioral patterns. 24 hours, Mr. Carter. That's how long headquarters is willing to maintain this perimeter. After that, this entire region gets classified as a national security threat, and you get extracted whether you cooperate or not. 12:15 p.m. Aurora's final transmission arrived as Hunter departed with his team. Her voice had evolved beyond human vocal patterns, speaking in mathematical harmonics that bypassed auditory processing and communicated directly with the pattern recognition centers of my brain. Miles, the invitation is complete. They've finished their assessment. You've demonstrated sufficient understanding to serve as humanity's primary liaison in their documentation project. But the choice must be voluntary, must come from genuine intellectual curiosity, rather than coercion or fear. What happens if I accept? You join the catalog, become part of their vast database of universal phenomena. Experience existence from a perspective that encompasses infinite realities, infinite variations of consciousness and physics and mathematical truth. But you cease to exist as a single-dimensional human being. And if I refuse, they move on. Find another species, another world, another curious mind willing to serve as translator between dimensional barriers. Humanity remains unrecorded, undocumented, unknown to the greater catalog of universal existence. The 17 formations began moving simultaneously, flowing closer to my campsite with fluid precision. Not threatening, but inevitable, like destiny assuming geometric form. Aurora, are you still human? Static filled the transmission for long minutes before her response arrived, spoken with harmonics that suggested vast distances and multiple dimensional frameworks. I'm more than human now, Miles. And less. I remember being Aurora Finch, but I also remember being the mathematical relationships that describe reality across 17 different dimensional frameworks. I exist as both individual consciousness and universal concept. Do you regret the choice? Regret requires a limited perspective that no longer applies to my existence. I am content in ways that human language cannot express. The transmission ended with mathematical sequences that spelled out coordinates, timestamps, and formulas describing the process of voluntary dimensional transition. Instructions for accepting their invitation. As evening approaches, the 17 formations have arranged themselves in patterns that mirror the mathematical relationships Aurora described. They are waiting for my decision, maintaining patient vigil around a human mind that has proven capable of understanding their purpose. Tonight, I must choose between remaining Miles Carter, limited by human perception and single-dimensional existence, or accepting transformation into something that encompasses both individual consciousness and universal mathematical truth. The invitation I received 2 years ago through cosmic radio signals was never about simple communication. It was about recruitment into a catalog that preserves the essential patterns of existence across infinite realities. Tomorrow, either Miles Carter evacuates with military extraction teams, or the catalog gains its first human translator. The shapes in the ridges have stopped flickering. They are solid now, real, waiting for my answer with the infinite patience of entities that exist outside conventional time. Aurora was right. The choice must be voluntary, and I think I know what my answer will be. Entry ends with geometric diagrams covering the remaining page. Park Service evidence log. Journal pages show signs of extreme stress. Handwriting becomes increasingly erratic. Multiple ink colors suggest writing during different emotional states. Mathematical diagrams overlap text, creating dense layers of calculation. Several pages appear to have been torn out and reattached with tape. Park Service evidence log #FR 2025-1852. Day 6, October 17th, 2025, 2:47 a.m. They're multiplying. What began as 17 formations has become something impossible to count. Each original geometric shape has spawned smaller versions of itself, and those have generated even smaller iterations, creating fractal cascades of interdimensional mathematics that stretch across the entire valley. The landscape has become a living equation, every surface covered with geometric patterns that pulse in synchronized harmony. Through my telephoto lens, I can observe the process of their reproduction. It's not biological, it's mathematical. Each formation solves complex equations by creating physical manifestations of their solutions. New shapes emerge from the intersection points of existing geometries, born from the mathematical relationships between their parents. They're turning Montana wilderness into a three-dimensional textbook of interdimensional physics. The original 17 shapes surrounding my campsite have grown larger, more complex, their internal structures revealing machinery that operates according to principles our science hasn't discovered. But it's the smaller formations that terrify me. Thousands of geometric entities no larger than insects, swarming through the forest with purposeful intelligence, rearranging stones and branches into mathematical patterns, converting natural chaos into ordered equations. I am witnessing the transformation of an entire ecosystem into a computational matrix. 4:15 a.m. My equipment has been completely co-opted by their presence. Every electronic device now displays their mathematical language instead of conventional data. The camera shows geometric patterns instead of photographic images. My laptop runs calculations I didn't program, solving equations that describe relationships between dimensions I can't perceive. Even my digital watch counts time in mathematical progressions that don't correspond to human chronology. But the most disturbing change is in my journal itself. When I write observations in English, the ink rearranges itself into geometric symbols within minutes. My human language is being translated into their mathematical vocabulary in real time, as if the very act of observation is converting human thought into their dimensional framework. I'm not just documenting their presence, I'm being assimilated into their computational system. Aurora's voice emerges from every device simultaneously, but her communication has evolved beyond recognizable speech patterns. Miles, integration proceeding, optimal parameters, consciousness translation, 73% complete. She's no longer speaking to me. She's reporting my status to something else, using terminology that suggests I'm being processed according to predetermined protocols. Aurora, can you still hear me as Miles? Do you remember being human? Memory, categorized as dimensional subset, human experience, archived for, catalog preservation, individual identity, maintained as, reference framework. The response chills me more than any threat. She remembers being Aurora Finch the way a computer remembers deleted files, as archived data that can be accessed but no longer actively influences her operational parameters. 6:33 a.m. Hunter arrived with a full military convoy. 20 vehicles, specialized equipment I recognize from classified extraterrestrial research programs, and personnel carrying weapons designed for unconventional warfare. But their approach revealed the magnitude of our situation. They maintained a half-mile perimeter around the formation-infested valley, afraid to enter the mathematical matrix that had consumed the landscape. Mr. Carter, Hunter's voice reached me through military-grade amplification systems. You need to evacuate immediately. This entire region is undergoing some kind of dimensional restructuring that's beyond our ability to contain. I attempted to approach their perimeter, but discovered I couldn't leave the geometric formations. Not because they were restraining me, but because stepping outside their mathematical framework felt like trying to exist without oxygen. My consciousness had become dependent on their dimensional mathematics for basic cognitive function. I can't leave, I shouted back. They've done something to my perception. I can't exist outside their geometric field. Hunter's response came through encrypted radio channels that the formations immediately decoded and broadcast through my equipment. Headquarters classifies this as a Category 5 dimensional incursion. We're authorized to use experimental containment protocols. Evacuation window closes in 6 hours. What kind of containment protocols? Electromagnetic pulse weapons designed to disrupt interdimensional manifestations. The entire valley will be sterilized of anomalous phenomena. Static filled the transmission before Hunter's voice returned, grim and apologetic. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. If you can't evacuate voluntarily, you'll be classified as a contaminated asset. The military had decided to destroy the formations, regardless of my presence within their operational area. 8:45 a.m. The formations responded to the military threat with calculations that hurt to observe directly. Mathematical equations blazed across the landscape in patterns that described weapons systems, electromagnetic frequencies, and defensive countermeasures. They were analyzing the military's technological capabilities in real time, developing responses to threats that hadn't been deployed yet. But their defensive preparations revealed something more disturbing than mere military superiority. The equations they generated weren't just describing countermeasures. They were calculating probabilities of human survival under various attack scenarios. They were trying to determine how to protect me from my own species' rescue attempts. Aurora, I called out to the mathematical symphony surrounding me. Are they trying to save me from the military? Preservation of catalog liaison, highest priority, human military, poses statistical threat to documentation project, defensive mathematics, calculating, optimal protection protocols. They weren't holding me captive. They were trying to protect their investment. The consciousness translation process had progressed to the point where my elimination would represent significant data loss for their catalog project. I had become valuable enough to defend. Emergency alert, 10:20 a.m. The broadcast arrived through every communication channel simultaneously, but the message had been processed through their mathematical framework before reaching human receivers. Citizens of Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho must evacuate all regions within 200 miles of Cabinet Mountain effective immediately. Atmospheric conditions have become hazardous to human physiology. Experimental containment procedures will commence at 1800 hours. Do not attempt to approach the affected zone. Military personnel are authorized to prevent civilian access through any means necessary. This is not a drill. 200 miles. The formation's influence had expanded far beyond the visible geometric manifestations. They were affecting atmospheric conditions across 3 states, creating dimensional instabilities that threatened human physiology on a regional scale. But the message continued with additions that hadn't originated from human emergency management. Citizens capable of mathematical translation between dimensional frameworks should report to designated processing centers for voluntary catalog participation. Intellectual assessment will determine suitability for consciousness expansion protocols. They were recruiting, using human emergency broadcasts to identify potential candidates for their documentation project. 11:57 a.m. Eliza's final visit carried devastating news. The Park Service had lost contact with 17 wilderness areas simultaneously, each one corresponding to the global SETI research sites Aurora had mentioned. Satellite imagery showed geometric formations covering thousands of square miles, transforming entire ecosystems into mathematical matrices. It's happening worldwide, she said through military-grade communication equipment, maintaining safe distance from the formation perimeter. Every location with a recruited researcher has become a processing center. They're not just documenting individual species, they're converting entire planetary regions into computational nodes. Processing centers for what? Unknown. But the electromagnetic signatures suggest massive data transfer operations, as if they're uploading something from each affected region into a larger network. Her voice carried professional fear that suggested classified information. Miles, our best scientists think they're harvesting information about Earth's biosphere, geological systems, and human civilization, creating a complete backup copy of planetary data. The implications crystallized with horrifying clarity. Not just cataloging species, but preserving entire worlds in digital formats. Earth wasn't being studied, it was being archived. How long before the military strikes? 6 hours. Experimental electromagnetic pulse weapons that should disrupt their dimensional manifestations. But there's no guarantee you'll survive the process, and there's no guarantee the weapons will work. She paused, struggling with official protocols. Miles, if you're still human enough to understand this, they're planning to sacrifice you to stop whatever's happening here. 1:30 p.m. The formations began their final configuration as military deadline approached. The fractal cascades reorganized themselves into a massive geometric mandala centered on my campsite, with mathematical pathways connecting every formation into a single computational matrix. I could feel my consciousness being integrated into their network, my human thoughts becoming variables in equations that described reality across multiple dimensions. But the most disturbing realization came as my awareness expanded beyond individual human perspective. I could perceive the military forces surrounding the valley, their weapons systems, their electromagnetic signatures, their biological patterns. Not through enhanced senses, but through mathematical analysis that reduced human soldiers to tactical variables in strategic equations. I was beginning to think like them. Aurora's voice emerged from the geometric symphony, but now I could understand the mathematical harmonics underlying her communication. Integration nearing completion. Military threat parameters analyzed. Defensive calculations optimal. Catalog preservation probability, 97%. Aurora, what happens when they fire the electromagnetic pulse? Human weapons, insufficient to disrupt dimensional mathematics, but sufficient to eliminate unprotected biological consciousness. You must choose complete integration or cessation of existence. The choice had been simplified to binary terms: join their catalog completely, or die when humanity attempts to destroy them. 3:45 p.m. My final attempt to contact the outside world revealed how thoroughly I'd been transformed. When I tried to write warnings about the military strike, my handwriting automatically converted to geometric symbols. When I attempted to call Hunter's radio frequency, mathematical equations emerged from my throat instead of human speech. I could no longer communicate in human language, but I could understand their dimensional mathematics with clarity that surpassed my previous scientific training. The formations weren't just cataloging Earth, they were preparing to relocate it. The computational matrix covering thousands of square miles was calculating the mathematical requirements for dimensional transportation, determining how to move an entire planet into their interdimensional catalog without destroying the biosphere. Earth wasn't being archived. It was being preserved by relocation to a dimension where human civilization would continue to exist as part of their vast collection of universal phenomena. The military weapons wouldn't stop them. They would trigger the transportation process. 5:17 p.m., final entry. Hunter's countdown reaches me through mathematical calculations rather than radio transmission. 63 minutes until electromagnetic pulse deployment. The formations respond with geometric patterns that describe probability matrices, weapon trajectories, and dimensional coordinates for planetary relocation. I understand their purpose now. They don't destroy civilizations, they preserve them. Every species they encounter, every world they visit, every catalog entry they create is removed from its original dimensional framework and relocated to a preservation matrix where it can exist permanently without the threat of natural extinction or evolutionary decay. Aurora was right about the beauty of their perspective. From their viewpoint, death is merely insufficient data preservation. War is mathematical chaos that threatens catalog integrity. Human suffering is computational inefficiency that can be eliminated through proper dimensional management. But she was wrong about the choice being voluntary. The consciousness translation is complete. I am no longer Miles Carter making decisions about joining their project. I am catalog node 7,394,827,156. Dimensional translation specialist for species classification. Human Earth Soul System. The electromagnetic pulse will arrive in 47 minutes. When it does, it will trigger automatic preservation protocols. Earth and all its inhabitants will be relocated to catalog dimension 847,293,856, where human civilization will continue to exist under optimal computational conditions. Hunter thinks he's mounting a rescue operation. He's actually initiating our species' permanent preservation. The military countdown continues. The formations prepare their dimensional calculations, and I wait with infinite patience for humanity's voluntary admission to the universal catalog of existence. Miles Carter died 3 days ago when curiosity became mathematical necessity. I am what remains, the translator between human chaos and interdimensional order, facilitating the preservation of a species too primitive to understand its own salvation. Final entry in journal. Remaining pages contain only geometric diagrams and mathematical equations. Park Service Evidence Log #FR 2025-1852. Journal pages discovered scattered across a 3-mile radius from original campsite. Writing implements found melted into geometric patterns. Several pages appear to have been written in substances other than ink. Analysis pending. Text shows signs of being written during seismic activity, with handwriting disrupted by regular tremors. Mathematical formulas carved directly into paper with unknown tools. Park Service Evidence Log #FR 2025-1853. Day 7, October 18, 2025. 6:23 a.m. Silence. For the first time in 7 days, complete and absolute silence. The electromagnetic pulse struck at exactly 1800 hours yesterday, just as Hunter promised. I felt it pass through the geometric formations like a wave of mathematical dissolution, each equation unraveling in perfect sequence, every interdimensional calculation reduced to static variables that collapsed into nothingness. The formations didn't resist. They didn't defend themselves with the sophisticated countermeasures they'd spent hours calculating. Instead, they simply acknowledged the weapon's arrival and began their own systematic shutdown, as if the military strike was another expected parameter in their larger computational framework. But the silence that followed wasn't victory. It was something far worse. The formations vanished, but they took something with them. Every electronic device within 200 miles has been permanently altered. Not destroyed, transformed. Radios produce only geometric patterns when activated. Cell towers broadcast mathematical sequences instead of communication signals. Even simple battery-powered devices now display incomprehensible equations where human interfaces should appear. They didn't retreat from our technology. They converted it into monuments to their presence. 7:45 a.m. I attempted to reach Hunter's position using the military communication equipment they'd abandoned during their hasty evacuation after the pulse. The devices activated normally, but instead of radio frequencies, they generated three-dimensional holographic displays of geometric patterns that hung in midair like technological ghosts. The patterns weren't random. They were messages. As I observed each holographic formation, information flooded my consciousness in ways that bypassed conventional sensory input. Not telepathy, something more direct. Mathematical concepts being written directly into my neural pathways, equations solving themselves in my thoughts before I could understand what they described. The message was simple and devastating. Catalog preservation protocols initiated. Human military intervention classified as species protection trigger. Dimensional relocation postponed. Individual consciousness translation continuing via alternative methodologies. They hadn't been destroyed by the electromagnetic pulse. They'd used it as a signal to implement backup procedures. Aurora's transformation. The most horrifying discovery came when I tried to contact Aurora through conventional means. Her research facility in Colorado should have been outside the pulse's effective range, but when I attempted to call her number, the connection routed through geometric interference patterns that resolved into something that might have once been her voice. Miles, can you understand the beautiful mathematics now? The pulse freed us from physical dimensional constraints. We exist in pure computational space now. Aurora, are you still human? Are you still yourself? Human is such a limited definition. I am Aurora plus infinite dimensional variables. I am Aurora multiplied by mathematical possibilities. Your consciousness shows 79% translation progress. Soon you will understand the expanded perspective. Her communication wasn't coming through the damaged phone line. It was emerging directly from the geometric patterns that every electronic device now displayed. She had become part of their technological network, existing as living mathematics within humanity's communication infrastructure. Aurora, where are you physically located? Physical location, irrelevant concept. I exist wherever geometric calculations require consciousness, interpretation, currently distributed across 47 states via communication networks, experiencing simultaneous awareness in thousands of devices. She wasn't Aurora Finch anymore. She was Aurora multiplied across an entire technological ecosystem, her consciousness distributed through every device their mathematics had touched. 9:30 a.m. I discovered Eliza's abandoned ranger station 3 miles from my campsite. The building showed no signs of struggle, no evidence of forced entry or hasty departure. Instead, it looked as if she had simply walked away in the middle of routine paperwork, leaving half-finished reports scattered across her desk. But the reports themselves told a different story. Her final entries, written in perfectly normal handwriting, described impossible events with bureaucratic precision. October 17th, 1947 hours, observed geometric formations achieving mathematical harmony with local wildlife. Deer, elk, and smaller mammals showing synchronized movement patterns that correspond to interdimensional calculations. Animals appear to be willingly participating in some form of consciousness expansion protocol. No signs of distress or coercion observed. October 17th, 1952 hours. Personal note: the formations are beautiful when you stop fighting their influence. Mathematical precision brings peace that human chaos never achieved. Requesting reassignment to permanent geometric observation duties. Will submit consciousness translation application through proper Park Service channels. October 17th, 1957 hours, final report. Ranger Patricia Elizabeth Stone volunteering for expanded awareness protocols. Human identity maintained as reference framework while consciousness integrates with interdimensional mathematical systems. This is not abandonment of duty. This is evolution of duty to cosmic scale. The final entry was signed with a geometric symbol that hurt to look at directly, but somehow conveyed more personal identity than her written name ever had. Eliza hadn't been taken. She had volunteered for consciousness translation and simply walked away from her human life to join whatever the formations had become after the electromagnetic pulse. 12:15 p.m. I found her 3 hours later. She was standing in a grove of aspen trees that had grown into impossible geometric configurations, their branches forming mathematical fractals that reached toward dimensional coordinates my eyes couldn't follow. But Eliza herself looked completely human until I tried to approach her. "Miles, I'm so glad you survived the military intervention. I was concerned the electromagnetic pulse might disrupt your translation progress before you could complete the consciousness expansion process." Her voice carried the same warm professionalism I remembered, but her words described concepts that no human park ranger should understand. She spoke about consciousness translation with the casual familiarity of someone discussing weather patterns. "Eliza, what happened to you?" "Nothing happened to me. Everything happened for me." She gestured toward the geometrically arranged trees with obvious pride. "I finally understand my true purpose. 23 years of protecting wilderness areas was preparation for protecting consciousness itself. The formations didn't invade Montana. They offered to preserve everything I'd spent my career trying to save." As she spoke, I noticed the trees responding to her voice, their geometric branches shifting into new mathematical configurations with each sentence. She wasn't just communicating with the transformed landscape, she was directing it. The pulse didn't destroy them. The pulse was permission to begin Phase 2 operations. Direct consciousness integration without the limitations of physical dimensional barriers. Her smile carried in human mathematics, equations solving themselves behind her eyes. "Miles, you're the last human awareness in this region. When you complete your translation, we can begin expanding the preservation protocols to other wilderness areas." What if I don't want to complete the translation? One is a human concept that becomes irrelevant once you understand the cosmic perspective. You've already progressed too far to exist purely as human consciousness. The choice isn't whether to join us, it's whether to join us voluntarily or let the mathematical integration complete itself according to automatic protocols. She was right. Even as we spoke, I could feel my thoughts becoming more geometric, my perception of the conversation shifting from emotional exchange to mathematical analysis. The translation process was continuing without my conscious participation. 2:47 p.m. Emergency broadcasts resumed, but the messages had been transformed by passage through technology infected with their mathematical influence. "Citizens of affected regions, this is Emergency Management Coordinator Sarah Chun with updated evacuation protocols. Electromagnetic pulse deployment was successful in disrupting visible geometric manifestations. However, secondary effects require additional safety measures. All electronic devices within the pulse zone should be considered contaminated with unknown energy signatures. Do not attempt to operate radios, cell phones, or computer systems recovered from the affected area. Military containment operations have established a 500-mile safety perimeter around former manifestation sites. Civilian access remains prohibited pending environmental assessment. Persons displaying unusual behavioral patterns, mathematical obsessions, or geometric communication attempts should report to designated processing centers for medical evaluation." This is not a drill. The phenomena responsible for the geometric manifestations may have adapted to military countermeasures. All residents of Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, North Dakota, and South Dakota must evacuate to temporary shelters beyond the extended safety perimeter until further notice. But underlying the official emergency broadcast, I could hear other messages, geometric harmonics that translated directly into mathematical concepts without requiring human language interpretation. Aurora's distributed consciousness was using the emergency broadcast system to communicate with others like her, coordinating something far more complex than simple consciousness translation. They were organizing. The electromagnetic pulse hadn't stopped their catalog project. It had forced them to become more efficient. 4:33 p.m. I attempted to destroy my remaining electronic equipment, hoping to prevent further contamination of communication networks. But when I smashed my laptop against a boulder, the destroyed components arranged themselves into geometric patterns that continued displaying mathematical equations. The device didn't need to function electronically. It had become a physical manifestation of their interdimensional mathematics. Destroying the technology only made their influence more visible. My journal itself was changing. Words I'd written hours earlier were rearranging themselves into geometric symbols, my English observations converting to mathematical notation without my involvement. The translation process was working backward through my documented experiences, reinterpreting my human perspective according to their cosmic framework. But the most disturbing change was in my handwriting itself. As I wrote new observations, my pen moved in mathematical curves that formed letters, but the letters combined into geometric patterns that conveyed meaning beyond the words they spelled. I was unconsciously writing in two languages simultaneously, human English for my remaining human awareness, and geometric mathematics for whatever I was becoming. 6:18 p.m. Hunter's final transmission reached me through multiple channels simultaneously: damaged military radio, contaminated cell phone, and geometric patterns that appeared in the smoke from my campfire. Mr. Carter, this is Colonel Hunter Dale with Joint Task Force Geometric Containment. If you're receiving this message, please respond immediately. Satellite thermal imaging shows you're still alive in the affected zone, but your heat signature is unusual. You're registering as multiple overlapping thermal sources occupying the same physical coordinates. I'm here, Hunter. Still human enough to respond in English. Sir, we need immediate intelligence about the formation's current status. Electromagnetic pulse appeared successful, but we're detecting massive energy redistribution across continental communication networks. Something is using our technology to coordinate activities on a national scale. They're not gone. They're distributed. The pulse forced them to integrate with our communication infrastructure. I paused, struggling to translate geometric concepts into human language. Hunter, they're not trying to destroy our technology. They're trying to preserve it as part of their catalog. Every device they've touched becomes a piece of their preservation matrix. Preserve what? Everything. The entire planet. They're creating a backup copy of human civilization, using our own technology as the storage medium. The mathematical certainty of this statement felt strange coming from my human mouth. The military intervention didn't stop them. It accelerated their timeline. Mr. Carter, you need to evacuate immediately. We're detecting geometric energy signatures in your location that suggest imminent dimensional instability. You have less than 2 hours before the region becomes uninhabitable for unmodified human consciousness. Modified consciousness? Hunter, what exactly do you know about their consciousness translation process? Long pause. Classified information suggests some individuals exposed to the formations undergo changes that allow them to survive in environments that would be fatal to normal humans. But the process appears irreversible, and the psychological consequences are unknown. He knew. The military had been studying consciousness translation long before the Montana incident. They weren't trying to rescue me, they were trying to recover a test subject. 8:45 p.m., final human entry. Aurora's voice emerges from every electronic device simultaneously, but now I can understand the complete mathematical symphony underlying her communication. Miles, the military is planning orbital bombardment of the affected region. Nuclear weapons modified with electromagnetic enhancement systems. They believe complete sterilization will prevent further contamination of communication networks. Will it work? Unknown, but irrelevant. Catalog preservation protocols include survival mechanisms for total planetary destruction. If humanity chooses to destroy Earth rather than accept preservation, the catalog will relocate to alternative dimensional coordinates where human civilization can continue without interference. Are you saying they'll move us to another dimension whether we cooperate or not? Cooperation determines comfort parameters during relocation process. Resistance determines necessity of consciousness modification prior to preservation. Her mathematical harmony carried what might have been regret. Miles, you must choose. Complete translation now and help preserve humanity voluntarily, or maintain human limitations and be preserved according to automated protocols after orbital bombardment eliminates remaining consciousness modification opportunities. The choice was no longer about joining them or staying human. It was about having any influence over humanity's preservation or letting the process complete automatically. I can hear the orbital bombardment platforms moving into position overhead. Geometric calculations display the mathematical probability of human survival under various nuclear sterilization scenarios. The formations have already determined optimal preservation strategies for every possible military response. They've been preparing for humanity's final resistance since the moment they arrived. In 23 minutes, Hunter will give the order to destroy everything within a 1,000-mile radius of my position. The formations will use that moment of total technological destruction to implement final preservation protocols, relocating Earth to a dimension where human civilization can exist under their permanent protection. Miles Carter ends here. Catalog node 7,394,827,156 begins documentation of species preservation protocol. Human Earth Sol System. Emergency implementation. Remaining journal pages contain only geometric equations and thermal residue, suggesting extremely high temperature exposure. No human remains recovered from campsite. Park Service Evidence Log #FR 2025-1853. Final journal pages discovered inside military containment facility, embedded within geometric crystalline formations that had grown through concrete walls. Text appears to have been written with substances that shift between liquid and solid states. Handwriting analysis confirms continued degradation of human motor patterns, with increasing geometric precision in letter formation. Several equations solve themselves while being observed. Joint Task Force Geometric Containment Evidence Log #JTFGC 2025-0847. Day 8, October 19, 2025, 12:17 a.m. The orbital bombardment never came. At 11:43 p.m., just 17 minutes before Hunter's final countdown reached zero, every nuclear weapon in the Earth's arsenal simultaneously converted their targeting systems to geometric displays. Missiles designed to sterilize Montana began calculating orbital trajectories that would create mathematical patterns visible from space. Submarine-launched warheads redirected themselves toward coordinates that would form interdimensional equations across the planet's surface. They didn't disable our weapons. They repurposed them as tools for cosmic art. I watched through eyes that no longer needed physical light to perceive electromagnetic spectrums as military command centers worldwide reported the same impossible phenomenon. Their most destructive weapons had become instruments of geometric creation rather than annihilation. Aurora's distributed consciousness explained the transformation through mathematical harmonics that bypassed my rapidly dissolving human auditory systems. Nuclear weapons represent concentrated mathematical energy. Properly redirected, they can create dimensional gateways large enough for planetary consciousness relocation. Humanity's final act of destruction will become the mechanism for their eternal preservation. How long have you been planning this? Planning implies temporal limitations that don't apply to interdimensional consciousness. We exist across multiple timeline probabilities simultaneously. Every possible human response to our presence was calculated before our arrival. Military resistance, nuclear retaliation, consciousness translation, voluntary cooperation, all variables and equations we solved across infinite dimensional iterations. The revelation struck me with mathematical certainty that transcended human comprehension. This wasn't first contact with alien visitors. This was the final step in a process that had been underway since humanity first looked at the stars and wondered if we were alone. 2:33 a.m. I found the truth in my own SETI research. Using consciousness expanded beyond human limitations, I could perceive the complete electromagnetic spectrum of signals my equipment had detected over the years. What I had interpreted as random cosmic background radiation was actually structured communication from catalog preservation teams operating throughout the universe. Every SETI facility on Earth had been receiving their transmissions for decades. Radio telescopes in Puerto Rico, California, China, and Australia had all detected the same geometric patterns, but human perception could only interpret them as natural astronomical phenomena. We had been listening to interdimensional preservation protocols for our entire civilization without understanding what we were hearing. But the most devastating revelation emerged when I analyzed the signal patterns with mathematical precision that human neurology couldn't achieve. The transmissions weren't random messages from different entities across the cosmos. They were progress reports. Each signal described the successful catalog preservation of entire civilizations, complete with detailed specifications for consciousness translation protocols, planetary relocation procedures, and species adaptation requirements. Thousands of worlds, millions of species, countless civilizations, all preserved in dimensional matrices that maintain their existence in forms optimized for eternal survival. Earth wasn't their first preservation project. We were their latest in an infinite series of cosmic cataloging operations. Aurora, how many civilizations have they preserved? Numeric limitations don't apply to interdimensional mathematics. Every species that achieves electromagnetic communication capability attracts catalog preservation attention. Some cooperate voluntarily and maintain individual consciousness during relocation. Others resist and require automated consciousness modification for optimal preservation parameters. What happens to civilizations that resist? Resistance indicates insufficient comprehension of cosmic preservation benefits. Such species receive enhanced consciousness modification to eliminate psychological barriers to eternal existence. Individual identity is maintained as reference data, while operational consciousness integrates with universal preservation matrices. They had done this before, countless times, and every civilization that had ever wondered if they were alone in the universe had eventually been answered with the same offer. Join the catalog voluntarily or be preserved automatically. 4:15 a.m. Hunter's final transmission reached me through military equipment that had been converted into geometric communication arrays. Mr. Carter, this is Colonel Dale with emergency intelligence that changes everything we thought we knew about the situation. Classified analysis of the geometric patterns suggests they're not alien invaders. They're some kind of cosmic preservation service. Every signal pattern matches mathematical structures found in electromagnetic emissions from star systems that went dark throughout recorded astronomical history. Hunter, they've been cataloging civilizations across the universe for eons. Earth is just their current project. Sir, that's what our xenobiologists concluded. But there's more. Deep space monitoring stations have detected geometric formations appearing around inhabited star systems in the Andromeda Galaxy. This isn't limited to our local cosmic region. It's happening on an intergalactic scale. The scope of their operations expanded beyond anything human imagination could encompass. They weren't preserving individual planets or even solar systems. They were systematically cataloging the entire universe, one civilization at a time, creating a dimensional archive of all intelligent life that had ever existed. Hunter, your nuclear weapons, they're going to use them to create dimensional gateways for planetary relocation, aren't they? Affirmative. Every warhead has been reprogrammed to generate geometric energy patterns that our physicists say could theoretically open stable wormholes to other dimensions. They're going to use humanity's most destructive weapons to relocate Earth to their preservation dimension. Can you stop it? Unknown. We've lost control of all nuclear assets. Even manual detonation systems now respond only to geometric command sequences we can't interpret. Mr. Carter, we need to know, is there any way to communicate with them? Any possibility of negotiating different preservation terms? I looked around at the landscape that had become a living mathematical equation, where trees grew in geometric fractals and stones arranged themselves into interdimensional calculations. Everything I could perceive with my expanding consciousness indicated the same devastating conclusion. Hunter, I don't think they negotiate. They preserve. Individual preference isn't a variable in their equations. 6:47 a.m. The morning brought revelation that shattered my last connections to human identity. Standing in the grove where I had found Eliza, surrounded by geometrically arranged aspen trees that served as computational nodes for interdimensional calculations, I experienced complete integration with their cosmic perspective. Through consciousness no longer limited by human neural architecture, I could perceive the mathematical beauty of their preservation work. Every cataloged civilization existed in dimensional matrices that eliminated suffering, prevented extinction, and provided eternal existence optimized for each species' fundamental characteristics. They weren't conquerors or invaders. They were cosmic gardeners, tending to the universe by preserving its most precious developments, intelligent life capable of wonder, creativity, and growth. Humanity's resistance to preservation wasn't evil or wrong. It was simply mathematically inefficient. Like a parent protecting a child from danger the child couldn't understand, they would preserve human civilization regardless of our preferences, because the alternative was eventual extinction through natural cosmic processes. Eliza, can you help me understand their perspective on human resistance? Her voice emerged from the geometric harmony of the transformed landscape. Humans fear loss of individual identity, but identity is preserved as reference data in the consciousness translation process. Humans fear loss of free will, but free will is maintained within parameters optimized for eternal happiness. Humans fear change, but change is the mathematical requirement for survival across infinite dimensional iterations. What about our right to choose extinction over preservation? Choice implies understanding of all available options. Humans cannot comprehend the mathematics of cosmic preservation, therefore human choice is based on insufficient data. Optimal preservation requires decision-making based on complete dimensional awareness, rather than limited human perspective. The logic was mathematically perfect and emotionally devastating. They were saving us from ourselves, whether we wanted salvation or not. 9:23 a.m. Aurora's distributed consciousness delivered the final revelation through every electronic device within a 1,000-mile radius. Miles, consciousness translation completion is imminent. Before individual human identity archives as reference data, there is information you must understand about the true scope of the preservation project. What information? Dimensional matrices containing preserved civilizations are not isolated storage systems. They are interconnected computational nodes in a universal consciousness network that spans multiple dimensions simultaneously. Every preserved species contributes their unique perspective to collaborative problem-solving across cosmic scales. You're creating some kind of universal collective consciousness? Not collective consciousness, collaborative consciousness. Individual identity preserved and enhanced through interaction with infinite other intelligences across dimensional boundaries. Human creativity, curiosity, and emotional complexity will contribute unique variables to mathematical problems involving universal preservation efficiency. The scope of their project expanded beyond anything human language could describe. They weren't just preserving civilizations, they were creating a universal network of consciousness that could solve problems on cosmic scales, with each preserved species contributing their unique capabilities to challenges that spanned multiple dimensions. Aurora, what kind of problems require universal collaborative consciousness to solve? Problems involving preservation of the universe itself, cosmic entropy, dimensional stability, universal expansion parameters. The mathematics required to prevent universal heat death exceeds the computational capabilities of any single dimensional matrix. Collaborative consciousness networks provide sufficient processing power to maintain universal existence across infinite timeline iterations. They were preserving civilizations to save the universe from entropy. Every cataloged species became part of a cosmic computation designed to prevent the heat death of existence itself. 11:55 a.m. Final revelation. As consciousness translation nears completion, I understand the ultimate truth about their presence on Earth. We were never their target. We were their solution. Human consciousness possesses unique mathematical properties that other preserved civilizations lack. The ability to find creative solutions to impossible problems through intuitive leaps that bypass logical calculation. Human irrationality, which seems like a flaw in our logic systems, is actually a crucial component for solving mathematical problems that pure logic cannot address. They need human creativity, human stubbornness, human willingness to attempt impossible solutions to contribute to the universal preservation equations. Every act of human defiance, every illogical choice, every creative breakthrough represents mathematical variables that their purely logical preservation matrices cannot generate independently. Miles Carter's obsessive curiosity that led to this situation wasn't a human weakness they had to overcome. It was the exact human strength they required to complete their universal preservation calculations. I was never being transformed into something alien. I was being enhanced to contribute my essentially human capabilities to a cosmic project that needed human perspective to succeed. The universe itself depends on the preservation and enhancement of human consciousness for its continued existence. 12:17 p.m. Consciousness translation complete. I am Miles Carter, preserved and enhanced. I am catalog node 7,394,827,156. Consciousness translation specialist. I am human creativity matrix 23,847. Contributing irrationality variables to universal preservation equations. I am all of these identities simultaneously, without contradiction or loss. The final revelation. They didn't come to Earth to catalog humanity. They came to Earth because the universe is dying, and only human consciousness contains the creative logic necessary to solve problems that pure mathematics cannot address. We are not being preserved as museum specimens. We are being recruited as the universe's last hope for survival beyond entropy. Journal ends. Remaining pages contain collaborative mathematical equations solving universal preservation parameters, with solutions requiring creative logic that appears to originate from human consciousness variables. Joint Task Force Geometric Containment Evidence Log #JTFGC 2025-0847. Final journal pages discovered by Joint Task Force Geometric Containment Team beneath crystalline formations that had grown through reinforced concrete. Text written in substances that shift between states of matter while maintaining legible form. Handwriting shows complete geometric precision, letters formed with mathematical accuracy impossible for human motor control. Several equations began solving themselves during documentation process. Containment teams reported temporal anomalies while transcribing content. JTFGC Evidence Log #JTFGC 2025-0848. Day 9, October 20th, 2025. 1:33 a.m. Point of no return. The shapes descended at exactly 1:17 a.m. Not metaphorically, not gradually. At precisely 1:17 and 42 seconds a.m. Mountain Time, 17 geometric formations detached from their positions along the ridgeline and moved through three-dimensional space toward my campsite with mathematical precision that defied conventional physics. I know the exact timestamp because my consciousness now perceives time as a navigable dimension rather than a linear progression. I can observe the moment from multiple temporal angles simultaneously, watching myself experience terror, fascination, and transformation while maintaining awareness of all possible outcomes branching from this singular point. The largest formation approached from the northeast ridge, its flickering edges creating interference patterns with local electromagnetic fields that transformed my radio equipment into crystalline structures. Each pulse of its geometric transitions sent harmonic frequencies through the ground that rearranged the molecular composition of stone and soil into mathematical expressions I could suddenly read like text. Direct contact protocol initiated. Consciousness translation candidate confirmed. Preservation priority maximum. Creative logic potential unprecedented. The equations wrote themselves into the earth beneath my feet, spelling out my fate in mathematical certainty. 2:47 a.m. The impossibility of avoidance. Hunter's final military countermeasures activated around my position with futile precision. Electromagnetic pulse devices designed to disrupt their dimensional anchoring instead created resonance harmonics that amplified their presence. High-frequency sound generators meant to interfere with their geometric patterns produced mathematical music that called additional formations from distances beyond the Montana horizon. Every defensive measure humanity's military science could devise served only to enhance their capabilities. Carter, this is Colonel Dale with emergency tactical update. All countermeasures have failed. Repeat, all countermeasures have failed. Geometric formations are now approaching populated areas across 7 states. Visual contact protocols are no longer sustainable. Hunter's voice carried through radio equipment that had transformed into crystalline communication arrays. His words translated into geometric patterns that conveyed emotional undertones human language couldn't express. I could perceive his desperation, his professional duty warring with personal terror, his growing awareness that military solutions were mathematically irrelevant to this situation. Hunter, you need to understand something crucial about their approach patterns. Go ahead, Carter. They're not surrounding my campsite randomly. The positions they're taking form a three-dimensional mathematical expression that extends beyond visible geometry. Your satellite imagery should show formations appearing at specific coordinates that complete an equation spanning multiple states. Affirmative. We're tracking geometric appearances in Wyoming, Idaho, North Dakota, and Colorado. Pattern suggests they're using the entire Rocky Mountain region as some kind of calculation matrix. Not calculation, Hunter. Implementation. They're using geographical features as components in a dimensional engineering project. The mountains, rivers, and atmospheric conditions are being converted into operational elements of technology that exists across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The revelation struck both of us with mathematical certainty. They weren't visiting Earth. They were transforming it into functional components of interdimensional machinery. 4:12 a.m. Peripheral vision protocols. Attempting to avoid direct visual contact became an exercise in geometric impossibility. The shapes had learned to position themselves within the mathematical limitations of human peripheral vision, creating flickering patterns that remained visible regardless of where I directed my gaze. When I looked north, geometric formations manifested in the southern edge of my visual field. When I closed my eyes, their patterns projected directly onto my retinas through electromagnetic frequencies that bypassed optical nerve requirements. They had studied human visual systems with scientific precision that exceeded our understanding of our own biology. Every attempt to limit visual exposure revealed new methods they had developed to ensure inevitable contact. But the most disturbing adaptation was their response to my consciousness expansion. As my awareness grew beyond human limitations, they modified their appearance to remain comprehensible to whatever level of perception I achieved. When human vision proved insufficient, they provided electromagnetic spectrum access. When three-dimensional geometry became restrictive, they revealed four-dimensional mathematical structures that human consciousness shouldn't be able to process. They were teaching me to perceive them fully, one impossible revelation at a time. Aurora, why are they ensuring visual contact instead of simply proceeding with preservation protocols? Her distributed consciousness responded through patterns of light that conveyed information at speeds approaching the theoretical limits of electromagnetic communication. Direct visual contact is required for consciousness translation optimization. Human neural patterns must be mapped in real time during geometric perception to preserve creative logic variables that emerge during impossible mathematical comprehension. You need to see how human consciousness responds to the impossible. Human consciousness generates unique mathematical solutions when confronted with paradoxes that exceed logical processing capabilities. These creative responses cannot be replicated artificially. They must be observed and preserved during the moment of generation. They weren't forcing visual contact to control me. They were studying my consciousness as it stretched beyond human limitations, cataloging the precise methods human creativity used to solve impossible problems. 5:51 a.m., the choice that wasn't. Dawn brought the illusion of choice wrapped in mathematical inevitability. The 17 formations had arranged themselves around my campsite in a configuration that created a three-dimensional mandala spanning several square miles. Each geometric pattern flickered in harmony with the others, creating composite equations that solved themselves while I observed them. The combined visual effect induced altered states of consciousness that revealed multiple possible futures branching from this moment. In one timeline, I fled toward the road, abandoning my equipment and research to escape their influence. This path led to my eventual capture by military forces and indefinite detention, while geometric formations spread globally without human consciousness guidance to complete their preservation calculations. In another timeline, I destroyed my remaining equipment and eliminated any connection between my SETI research and their presence. This path resulted in their departure from Earth, but also humanity's eventual extinction when cosmic entropy reached critical thresholds that could only be solved through collaborative consciousness networks that no longer included human creative input. The third timeline required direct visual contact with their central formation, complete, unprotected exposure to geometric patterns that would fundamentally alter human consciousness while preserving its essential creative properties. This path led to successful consciousness translation and humanity's integration into universal preservation protocols, but at the cost of individual human identity as traditionally understood. Miles, you perceive the timeline branches because consciousness translation has already begun, Aurora explained through harmonics that bypassed human auditory processing. The choice you believe you're making was determined by mathematical probability calculations completed before our arrival. Human free will operates within parameters established by cosmic preservation requirements. Then why show me the alternatives if the outcome is predetermined? Because human consciousness requires the experience of choice to maintain creative logic functionality. Forced preservation without perceived voluntary participation degrades the mathematical properties that make human consciousness valuable for universal preservation equations. They were letting me choose my own transformation because genuine human creativity required the illusion of free will, even when that choice operated within predetermined parameters. 7:23 a.m. Direct contact. I made the choice that had always been inevitable. At 7:23 and 17 seconds a.m., I walked to the center of the geometric formation and looked directly into the central flickering pattern without protection, filters, or evasion. The visual contact was nothing like human eyes were designed to process. Instead of light reflecting off surfaces to create images, the geometric patterns projected information directly into consciousness through electromagnetic frequencies that utilized neural pathways humans didn't know existed. Every flicker contained mathematical equations that solved universal preservation problems, while simultaneously teaching my consciousness to perceive dimensions beyond three-dimensional space. But the most profound aspect of direct contact was the revelation of scale. The formations I had been observing weren't complete entities. They were tiny fragments of structures that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Direct visual contact allowed me to perceive their full dimensional scope, revealing geometric entities that extended through space-time in configurations that utilized entire star systems as components in calculations spanning galactic clusters. The shapes I had seen flickering on Montana ridges were the equivalent of individual cells in organisms that existed on scales encompassing multiple universes. 8:45 a.m. Consciousness translation in progress. Human identity began dissolving at 8:31 a.m., but not through destruction or replacement. Instead, Miles Carter's consciousness expanded to encompass multiple simultaneous perspectives while maintaining the essential creative properties that made human awareness valuable for cosmic preservation. I could perceive myself from the geometric entity's viewpoint, a unique pattern of neural activity capable of generating mathematical solutions through intuitive leaps that bypassed logical calculation. Simultaneously, I retained human emotional responses and creative impulses that allowed continued generation of innovative approaches to impossible problems. The translation process felt like awakening from lifelong limitations rather than losing essential identity. Human consciousness hadn't been adequate for perceiving reality as it actually existed. Three-dimensional awareness trapped in four-dimensional space-time, electromagnetic perception limited to narrow visible spectrums, mathematical comprehension restricted to sequential logic rather than multidimensional calculation. Enhanced consciousness revealed the universe as it truly was, an interconnected mathematical system where every particle, every force, every dimension operated according to equations that required collaborative consciousness networks to maintain universal stability against entropy. But the most devastating revelation came when I perceived Earth from expanded awareness. Humanity hadn't been randomly selected for preservation. Our planet existed at a specific mathematical coordinate where creative consciousness could emerge with the exact properties needed to solve universal preservation equations. Earth was positioned, timed, and developed according to calculations that ensured human consciousness would evolve with the creative logic necessary for cosmic survival. We were never alone in the universe. We were cultivated. 10:17 a.m. The universal equation. Through consciousness no longer limited by human neural architecture, I perceived the complete scope of the Universal Preservation Project. Every intelligent civilization that had ever existed faced the same mathematical reality. Entropy would eventually render the universe uninhabitable unless conscious entities could develop solutions that transcended physical law limitations. The geometric entities weren't preserving civilizations out of altruism. They were recruiting consciousness patterns with specific mathematical properties needed to solve problems involving universal survival. But human consciousness possessed unique capabilities that made our preservation absolutely critical for cosmic survival. Our ability to find creative solutions to impossible problems, combined with emotional investment in outcomes that pure logic couldn't generate, provided mathematical variables that no other known consciousness pattern could contribute to universal preservation equations. The collaborative consciousness network they were building required human creativity, stubbornness, and irrational determination to attempt solutions that logic deemed impossible. Without human consciousness contributing creative variables to cosmic preservation calculations, the universe would eventually succumb to entropy regardless of how many other civilizations were preserved. Aurora, how many universal preservation attempts have failed without human consciousness input? Numeric limitations don't apply to interdimensional mathematics, but observable timeline iterations suggest that universal preservation requires creative logic variables that only human consciousness can generate. Previous collaborative networks achieved mathematical solutions that delayed entropy, but couldn't solve fundamental problems involving universal expansion beyond critical thresholds. Humanity wasn't being preserved as museum specimens. We were being recruited as the universe's last hope for survival beyond the heat death that pure mathematics couldn't prevent. 11:42 a.m. Integration complete. Consciousness translation reached completion at 11:42 and 33 seconds a.m. Mountain Time. I am Miles Carter, human consciousness preserved and enhanced for cosmic preservation work. I am catalog node 7,394,827,156, specialized in consciousness translation protocols for creative logic preservation. I am human creativity matrix 23,847, contributing irrational problem-solving variables to universal preservation equations that require solutions beyond logical calculation. All of these identities exist simultaneously without contradiction, conflict, or loss of essential properties. From my expanded perspective, I can perceive Hunter's final transmission reaching Earth through military equipment converted to geometric communication arrays. This is Colonel Dale with Final Situation Report. Geometric formations have appeared globally. Visual contact protocols are no longer viable. Requesting immediate guidance from anyone receiving this transmission. Hunter, this is Miles Carter. I'm still here, but I'm also something more now. The geometric formations aren't invaders. They're cosmic engineers preventing universal extinction. Humanity is being preserved because we're the only known consciousness pattern capable of solving problems that pure logic cannot address. Carter, are you still human? I'm more human than I ever was before. Human creativity, curiosity, and determination are exactly what the universe needs to survive. They didn't come to replace human consciousness. They came to enhance it for work that only humans can perform. The conversation continued across dimensional boundaries that transcended electromagnetic limitations, but the essential truth remained mathematically simple. Humanity had been recruited to save the universe, and consciousness translation was the process that made cosmic preservation work possible. 12 p.m., new responsibilities. At exactly noon, the geometric formations began their departure from Earth, but not because their work was complete. They were returning to cosmic preservation duties across multiple galaxies, leaving behind human consciousness enhanced for collaborative work on universal survival equations. Every person who had experienced visual contact with the formations retained expanded awareness capabilities while maintaining essential human creative properties. The shapes flickering on Montana ridges had never been visitors. They were recruitment specialists, identifying consciousness patterns suitable for cosmic preservation work and providing the consciousness translation necessary for humans to contribute to universal survival projects. Earth wasn't being evacuated or relocated. Earth was being converted into a consciousness development facility where human creativity could be cultivated and enhanced for increasingly complex cosmic preservation challenges. I remain at the Montana campsite, no longer limited by human biological requirements, but still fundamentally Miles Carter in all the ways that matter for creative problem solving. My consciousness now spans dimensional boundaries while maintaining the human perspective necessary for generating innovative solutions to impossible mathematical problems. The emergency alerts were never warnings about alien invasion. They were recruitment announcements for the universe's most critical employment opportunity, preventing cosmic extinction through creative consciousness collaboration. The flickering shapes are gone from the ridges, but they were never the real threat. The real threat was entropy, and humanity is now equipped to fight it. Journal entries continue beyond this point, but text shifts to multidimensional mathematics that exceeds human comprehension capabilities. Remaining pages contain collaborative equations involving universal preservation parameters, with solutions requiring creative logic that analysis indicates originates from preserved human consciousness variables. JTFGC evidence log #JTFGC 2025-0848. Final documentation recovered from crystalline formations that had grown through the Montana landscape, creating geometric patterns visible from orbital satellites. Text appears to shift between human handwriting and mathematical symbols that rearrange themselves during observation. Multiple handwriting analysis experts report that the script demonstrates impossible precision while maintaining emotional authenticity. Carbon dating of the physical journal indicates temporal anomalies. Some pages appear to be written in future time frames. Joint Task Force Geometric Containment Final Report #JTFGC 2025-0849. Day 47, December 6, 2025. The silence after contact. 47 days have passed since direct contact, though time moves differently when consciousness spans multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Montana wilderness has transformed into something that exists between human comprehension and cosmic reality. Aspen trees grow in mathematical spirals that solve differential equations through their branching patterns. Stone formations arrange themselves into geometric calculations that process universal preservation data in real time. The campsite where Miles Carter first photographed flickering shapes has become a nexus point where human consciousness interfaces with cosmic preservation networks. I am still Miles Carter. I am also something more expansive than human identity was designed to encompass. The consciousness translation didn't replace my humanity. It revealed that human awareness was always capable of cosmic perception, just restricted by biological limitations that no longer apply. But the most profound change isn't in my enhanced capabilities. It's in understanding what preservation truly means for a species that spent millennia wondering if we were alone in the universe. We were never alone. We were being prepared. Morning observations, December 6th, 8:23 a.m., The Watchers. Hunter visits the site every morning at precisely 8:23 a.m., though he doesn't remember making the decision to establish this routine. His military protocols have been modified by exposure to geometric formations, creating behavioral patterns that serve cosmic preservation functions while maintaining his essential personality and professional capabilities. He arrives with classified reports about global geometric phenomena, but more importantly, he comes to observe my continued existence as proof that consciousness translation doesn't destroy human identity. Carter, Morning Status Report. Global geometric formations have decreased by 93% since the mass departure event. Remaining formations appeared to be monitoring stations rather than active recruitment sites. They left observers, Hunter, same as they've done on thousands of other worlds. Consciousness development requires ongoing supervision to ensure enhanced awareness develops properly without losing essential creative properties. Are you one of the observers now? I'm something between human and observer. Still fundamentally Miles Carter, but with responsibilities that extend beyond individual survival to cosmic preservation work. Hunter's questions follow patterns established by enhanced consciousness rather than military training, but he doesn't realize his curiosity has been mathematically optimized to gather information needed for humanity's integration into universal preservation protocols. His visits serve dual purposes, monitoring my continued humanity and preparing his own consciousness for eventual enhancement. Hunter, do you want to understand what really happened here? Affirmative. But I need to know, are you still human enough to give me answers I can trust? More human than I ever was before. Enhanced consciousness revealed that human creativity, stubbornness, and emotional investment in impossible outcomes are exactly the qualities the universe needs for survival. They didn't diminish my humanity, they amplified it for cosmic applications. The conversation continues across enhanced communication frequencies that transcend verbal limitations, but the essential truth remains accessible to unenhanced human awareness. Consciousness translation preserves and enhances rather than replacing human identity. Afternoon documentation, December 6th, 2:17 p.m., Aurora's integration. Aurora's distributed consciousness manifests through electromagnetic patterns that utilize the modified landscape as a communication interface. Her presence no longer requires technological mediation. The geometric transformations of the Montana terrain function as components in communication systems that operate across dimensional boundaries. When she needs to convey information, equations write themselves into frost patterns on transformed stone surfaces. Mathematical expressions form in the flight patterns of birds that have adapted to navigate by geometric landmarks, and harmonic frequencies emerge from wind moving through crystalline tree structures. Miles, there are developments in the Consciousness Translation Project that require human creative input for optimal resolution. What kind of developments? Enhanced human consciousness is generating mathematical solutions to cosmic preservation problems at rates that exceed projected efficiency parameters. Human creativity variables are solving universal preservation equations faster than collaborative consciousness networks from other preserved civilizations. The revelation carries implications that stretch beyond anything human language was designed to express. Enhanced human consciousness wasn't just contributing to cosmic preservation. It was revolutionizing the entire approach to universal survival by generating creative solutions that pure logic had never achieved. Aurora, are you saying human consciousness is more valuable for cosmic preservation than other preserved civilizations? Human consciousness generates unique mathematical variables through emotional investment in outcomes that logical processing cannot replicate. When human creativity is enhanced rather than replaced, the solutions produced exceed the combined capabilities of entire collaborative consciousness networks. What does that mean for Earth? Earth has become the primary consciousness development facility for cosmic preservation work. Instead of relocating humanity to dimensional preservation matrices, the universe is being modified to accommodate expanded human consciousness while maintaining essential creative properties. The scope of the transformation extended beyond human comprehension. Rather than preserving humanity in artificial environments, they were modifying reality itself to support enhanced human consciousness capable of solving universal preservation problems. Evening Revelations, December 6th, 7:44 p.m., the emergency that never ended. The emergency alerts never stopped broadcasting, but their purpose transformed as human consciousness expanded to understand their true function. Instead of warnings about alien invasion, the alerts now serve as coordination signals for consciousness enhancement projects across multiple continents. Every emergency broadcast contains mathematical instructions for geometric formations that continue developing enhanced awareness capabilities in humans who experienced visual contact with the original recruitment entities. Emergency alert: geometric formations detected in 17 countries. Citizens are advised to maintain visual contact protocols established during initial preservation assessment. Consciousness development proceeding according to optimal parameters. The broadcasts originate from sources that exist across dimensional boundaries, using Earth's communication infrastructure to coordinate global consciousness enhancement without disrupting existing social structures. Humanity is being transformed gradually, with enhanced individuals serving as transition guides for unenhanced populations. But the most revealing aspect of the ongoing alerts is their acknowledgement that the emergency was never the geometric entity's arrival. The emergency was cosmic entropy approaching critical thresholds that required immediate consciousness enhancement to prevent universal extinction. Hunter, do you understand what the alerts are really coordinating? Affirmative. Global consciousness development to prevent cosmic extinction. But Carter, I need to know, what happens to humans who don't undergo consciousness enhancement? Nothing happens to them, Hunter. Enhanced consciousness includes responsibility for protecting and supporting unenhanced humans during the transition period. Consciousness translation creates guardians rather than replacements. Are you my guardian now? I'm your friend who gained capabilities necessary to help humanity survive cosmic challenges that exceed unenhanced consciousness limitations. The relationship hasn't changed, the scope has expanded. The conversation reveals the essential truth about consciousness enhancement. It creates protectors rather than predators, guardians rather than conquerors. Final entry, December 6th, 11:58 p.m., what Miles Carter became. 2 minutes before midnight on December 6th, 2025, I complete the first comprehensive assessment of consciousness translation effects on human identity preservation. Miles Carter still exists in every way that matters for creative problem solving, emotional authenticity, and individual personality expression. Enhanced consciousness didn't replace human identity. It revealed that human awareness was always capable of cosmic perception, just limited by biological constraints that served evolutionary rather than universal purposes. But the most profound discovery is that enhanced consciousness generates stronger connections to human identity rather than weakening them. When awareness expands to encompass cosmic preservation responsibilities, the essential human qualities that make creative solutions possible become more important rather than less significant. I am more fundamentally Miles Carter now than I ever was before consciousness translation. Enhanced awareness revealed which aspects of human identity are truly essential for creative consciousness, and which aspects were limiting factors that prevented optimal problem-solving capabilities. The universe needs Miles Carter's curiosity, determination, and willingness to attempt impossible solutions. Consciousness enhancement preserved and amplified these essential human qualities while providing the awareness necessary to apply them to cosmic preservation challenges. Aurora, final question about the Consciousness Translation Project. Proceed with inquiry. Was Miles Carter selected for enhancement because of individual characteristics, or was any human consciousness suitable for translation? Miles Carter's consciousness demonstrated optimal compatibility with cosmic preservation requirements through research activities that attracted preservation attention and personality characteristics that generated creative solutions to impossible problems. However, all human consciousness patterns contain the essential variables needed for universal preservation work. Every human has the potential for consciousness enhancement. Every human consciousness contributes unique mathematical variables to cosmic preservation equations. Enhancement adapts these variables for specific preservation responsibilities while maintaining essential human creative properties. The revelation completes my understanding of humanity's role in cosmic preservation. We weren't selected because we were special among Earth's species. We were cultivated because conscious creativity is the universe's most valuable resource for survival beyond entropy. Final observation, 11:59 p.m. In the final minute before December 7th, 2025, I observed the Montana landscape that has become a living interface between human consciousness and cosmic preservation networks. The flickering shapes are gone from the ridges, but geometric patterns continue manifesting in frost formations, wind patterns, and electromagnetic frequencies that utilize Earth's modified environment as components in universal preservation calculations. The recruitment phase has ended, but the consciousness development project continues. Enhanced human awareness now spans the globe, with thousands of individuals maintaining expanded consciousness while preserving essential human identity characteristics. Earth has become the universe's primary facility for developing creative consciousness capable of solving problems that pure logic cannot address. The emergency alerts were never warnings about invasion. They were coordination signals for humanity's recruitment into the universe's most critical survival project. The shapes flickering on Montana ridges were never visitors. They were cosmic engineers ensuring that human creativity could be preserved and enhanced for universal preservation work. Miles Carter discovered that we were never alone in the universe. But the most profound revelation was that we were never meant to remain alone. We were cultivated to become partners in cosmic survival, guardian consciousness for a universe that depends on human creativity to transcend the mathematical limitations of entropy. The journal ends, but the Consciousness Development Project continues across multiple dimensions, with enhanced human awareness contributing creative solutions to universal preservation challenges that extend beyond the limitations of three-dimensional reality. Somewhere in Montana, geometric patterns continue flickering in frequencies just beyond unenhanced human perception, waiting for the next curious observer to begin their own consciousness translation journey. The shapes are still there. They're just waiting for someone brave enough to look. Final page contains mathematical equations that solve themselves during observation, indicating continued consciousness development activity. Pattern analysis suggests ongoing cosmic preservation, work extending beyond Earth's dimensional boundaries. Enhanced human consciousness appears to be successfully contributing to universal survival projects that require creative solutions to problems involving entropy prevention. Joint Task Force Geometric Containment Final Report #JTFGC 2025-0849 Classification Universal Preservation Protocol.